Hey folks, so I recorded this video before the recent news that these would have an extremely limited print run. Um, I feel a little bit bad or maybe more bitterly disappointed that I think a lot of people who want to get these boxes aren't going to be able to, but I still think it's worth it to at least put this out here, still release what I created because for the people who do manage to get a hold of them, they are pretty useful in Warcry, and I think it's worth going over that. Um, for everyone who isn't able to get a copy, probably including myself, there are others who have done a better job sort of grumping to GW about the kind of FOMO marketing here. So I'll leave that to the most bare minimum. So here you go. Here's the guide that I that I recorded a couple days ago. Um, if you are able to get these, how excited you should be about them in Warcry. So we just got news that the battle forces are going to be on their way next weekend, and so they're built for Age of Sigmar in mind, or at least these four are. But I think it's worthwhile taking a look at all these value boxes for Warcry anyway, just because I think that it's going to be the first game you can actually build with them, right? Because none of these give you a full army, but part of why it's such an exciting time on the schedule is you do get about 40% of an AOS army for much cheaper than normal. And it's also often the only place where some of these forces can ever be found on any kind of value. Um, the this version of Slaanesh, the Slaanesh mortals are like that. I think Lumineth is like that. So let's talk about these boxes and what you get in them as far as actually playing them in Warcry. Um, the Lumineth box starts with the Venari Lord Regent, sort of the cow horse. I actually think it's better looking than just calling it a cow horse, but um, this is a really powerful unit for the most part. It's fast, it's really tough. It does enough damage that you will, you'll feel like you have a real big leader, but point for point, it's not very much. It also has the mount keyword, which is a liability on some maps, some terrain sets, and really good in others and more open ones, really powerful. So the Steed Master, who is the boss of the cavalry, so this guy over here in the center of your screen, uh, just as tough essentially as the Venari Lord Regent. Trades 4 hit points, but has range 2 on the weapon. The issue is that it does much less damage to the point where basically all of these cavalry are pretty pillow fisted. Um, just going to have a tough time taking out anything with them. The Blade Lord Seneschal, now that's the leader of the swordsmen, swords elves. Um, it's just an all damage blender. It goes down pretty quick in a fight, but the 7.33 DPA 3, so that's damage against toughness 3 per inactivation, it's the same as the Lord Regent for just a fraction of the points. And so that's really incredible if you're looking to save points on your leaders. If you want to invest elsewhere in your warband, that's going to be really solid. Finally, you've got the High Warden. That's just the leader of the spearmen. Um, Not very special stats in any direction, not particularly tough, not particularly damaging. Doesn't get the range 3 of the wardens, so a pretty medium unit. If I were looking for something super cheap, I would just go with the Blade Lord. Um, Although sometimes you might want to do two, depending on like the missions you're facing. For the troops you get some really good options here. So the Blade Lords, the first one, they're just smaller blenders, just like their leader is. Um, they're really amazing in terms of move 5, a ton of damage coming out of them. Um, and then you also get the Venari Wardens, which are solid as well. Not incredibly impressive damage, but range 3, which gives them just a ton of utility on the board, especially with their move 5, and they do enough damage that your opponent will respect them, will actually want to try to take them out, which is always really important with any kind of range higher than 1 kind of unit. Um, your Dawn Riders, I kind of mentioned before, but they're a little pillow-fisted. Useful as far as sort of running across the board, getting to a place to be fighting or contesting on it. But I really don't think you need them given how fast your warband is already. Unfortunately, that ballista and the giant banner bearer, they aren't in Warcry. I think the banner bearer could go in, right? But yeah, just no rules for it yet. As far as lists, what I would do with them, um, for the base game, I think I would go with the Lord Regent and one Dawn Rider, one Cavalry, and then the rest would be kind of even split between Blade Lords and Wardens. A little bit more Blade Lords just because the numbers work out better. Um, I think that Blade Lords are really good in this game, and I would use, you know, all four of them that you have available. Um, I think this is going to be really good. The reason why I put a different list for Red Harvest for these ones is because the base game list that I think that you'd want to use out of this Battle Force um, relies on two mounted units, and in my testing games so far of Red Harvest, mount keyword is a huge liability. I think mounted units really struggle to make the most of their movement in Red Harvest, whereas in the base game it's much more wide open. They can absolutely get their full utility there. So for Red Harvest, I think I would just want to have as much numbers as possible and still use all four of the Blade Lords that you have available to you, and just have more Venari Wardens. There's some 2-inch high terrain in Red Harvest, a lot of spots where you can use that so that a Venari Warden can be below the fighter on the platform and still be stabbing them up on their platform, which I think is really valuable. And you can get to a lot of places in that game with the 3-inch reach of the Wardens where you are stabbing something that can't stab you back. Especially with the sluices, you could sort of the low one, you can see over the sluice, stab them. They can't really come back at you. They have to pay a movement penalty to even come catch you. Um, yeah, just a lot of utility with Venari Wardens in Red Harvest there. Um, some things about playing the Lumineth in Warcry. One really notable ability is Shining Company. It's for all the Wardens. It just really cripples opposing damage in any kind of important team fight. Um, it's for if you're close together, you can get an AoE damage debuff, and that's really solid. Something that you should be kind of um, looking to position yourself to try to pull off in a lot of games. For notable fighters, you could add for the purposes of Warcry. Although hilariously, these two are pretty solid in AOS 2. First is the Roo Riders. The Kangaroos are going to be really amazing in Red Harvest. I'm finding, well, specifically the leader finding in my own tests and then in a lot of more actually from what other people are saying um, that all of the people like say the Skyfire's leader or the Knight Venator or the Rue Rider leader, all of the leaders that can really get anywhere they need to get on the battlefield and then shoot um, are a little bit better in Red Harvest than they were in the base game. In the base game, you wanted your super mobile units to usually be sort of more dragon type things where they just come in and chomp something from 10 inches away. Not to say that those other units were bad, it's just that I think in Red Harvest, those have come up a level compared to where they were before. Um, Also, in the base game, having one Hurricane Wind Charger, which is the regular Roo Riders, not the leader, they're just really good in the base game for being able to move to wherever you need to move, and then, you know, once you're there, sort of shoot wherever the important team fight is happening. They barely do any damage, but some is better than none there, especially for the other utility they give you. Then Sentinels, um, kind of medium in Warcry, but the high Sentinel, the Sentinel leader, has an incredible ability. Maybe one of the 3 or 4 best doubles in the entire game. Basically, picking out a model from the opposing warband, and your entire warband basically gets an onslaught against it for the rest of the round. Uh, just can be amazing for anytime you face an opponent with like say Flesh Eater courts, where they just have one leader unit that you might just not be able to deal with, all of a sudden a High Sentinel can help you deal with them, and it makes one of the best allies in Warcry too. So those are some other things you could choose to add. If you're buying this box for AOS and just want to take it for a spin in Warcry, you're already going to be getting the Sentinels anyway, so you could add a High Sentinel to your warband pretty easily. Let's get into the Bone Reapers now. Um, 3 leaders come with the box, and it's a little rough. So the Mortisan Soul Reaper, um, kind of a blah ability, terrible fighting stats. Same with the Mortisan Bone Shaper, except the ability is even worse. The Mortek Hekatos, I think, is perfectly reasonable, very difficult to kill, kind of middling damage, but and also very, very slow, 3 inches. Although the Bone Reapers have a little bit they can do to fix that. Your troops, though, I think are more interesting. So this box, one thing I should have mentioned from the beginning, this box has sort of the least overlap with Warcry of a lot of the boxes, right? Coming with all of those Mortek Guard, you're never going to use all of them in Warcry. And then, of course, a lot of the value of the box is tied up in the catapult and the incredible sort of big stompy construct that I think is actually one of the cooler models that GW has produced, but uh, not no rules for that in Warcry. Um, but you do get a couple interesting troops here. So the box is going to come with 2 of the 95 point Great Sword Mortek Guard, just one big sword. Um, and those are really good. As far as move 3 models go, they're really solid. They do a ton of damage. Think of them a little bit like Graveguard, except sort of bigger and a little bit harder to kill. Um, the spears and the swords are pretty disappointing. The spears only have that 1.67 DPA 3, doing even less at higher amounts. So I would stay away from them just because, like I said before, range 2 is so much better on models that do respectable damage. The swords also can be a little bit tough there, but the two the two great swords that come in the box are amazing. And then more importantly, stalkers. Stalkers are really, really good. Move 5, a ton of damage. The ones with the 4 swords are incredible. Um, the ones with 2 big swords, less amazing, but definitely not bad. So if you already built yours like that, don't worry about it. They take onslaught really, really well. The Immortus Guard is sort of the other thing you can build there instead of the stalkers. Just awful in Warcry. Don't touch those. Let's talk about the list I would make just using this Battleforce box would probably be the Hekatos, and then 3 Stalkers with 4 swords, 2 Mortek with the 2-handed swords. So with the troops, just using the ones that are really powerful and kind of forgetting everyone else. I think some valuable fighters you could add to this warband. The first is the Liege Cavalos. Has the mount keyword, which often a liability, but otherwise just a really powerful, fairly fast fighter that, OCARC is kind of struggling for speed most of the time anyway, so having that Leech Cavalos can really help you there. Another way to deal with your speed problem is having a FEC ally. So Unstoppable Advance is the OCARC ability that gives half the dice roll to everything in your deployment group, which is really cheeky later in later rounds, but is a solid movement ability regardless. However, I think the reason or at least OCR gets so much out of having a Flesh Eater Courts ally is being able to do it in multiple different deployment areas, depending on what you need. And then also the Flesh Eater Courts ability gives you the full value of the dice, which can feel pretty broken sometimes. That would be most valuable in a list that isn't going all in on stalkers. The list that I put here, 6 units, 4 of them are basically stormcasts. So it's gonna have that super elite feel to it. And stalkers are fast enough that you don't really need to buff their movement much. So I would put the 2-handed swords with the Hekatos and try to use Unstoppable Advance there. But if you were branching out and you wanted to have more numbers in an OCR list, that's when I think adding in a Flesh Eater Courts ally could be really useful. One thing to note on Nadirite weapons, Um, it's sort of the universal damage buff that OC gets. On most things, it's less effective than Onslaught. However, um, on a Stalker, it does significantly better than Onslaught does, so worth keeping in mind there. Hunt and Kill is another Stalker ability. I think in general you're going to want to use all your dice on your Stalkers. It's the same ability that Fleshhounds have in Khorne. If you're within 6 inches of an opponent, you get a free move activation. A few other groups have this. I think Slaanesh has this too. Um, One of the best in the game, honestly. Every single unit that has it, a few warbands, but each one that does, it's incredible for them. Um, it is better in Khorne because Fleshhounds have that 8-inch movement, so they can use the 6-inch radius to actually like over jump the unit that they're targeting and target something else. But still, here it's still going to be amazing. And stalkers, you'll often get an extra attack, even though it's a bonus movement ability, because you'll um, sort of attack something, say, use your ability to get into combat with something else, and then attack that. So just a really amazing ability to always be looking out for sort of the best way to use it whenever you play with stalkers. So let's get into Slaanesh now. Slaanesh Sybarites. Um, Tough for me to say 5 times fast, but I'm sure a lot of other people have better diction. Uh, the Shard Speaker, 170 points. Your model right in the middle there of that picture. Terrible fighting stats on the Shard Speaker, but an amazing ability. Just an AoE damage debuff that's just really, really effective. So it can be pretty tempting to use the Shard Speaker as your leader, and you do get two. But this box comes with a million different leaders. This might be the best box for Warcry. Not that the sort of list that you'd get out of it would be the most powerful. I think, for example, Lumineth, that list would be more powerful. But just as far as every single model in this box is usable in Warcry, I think is so cool. Um, so yeah, you get a ton of different leaders here. So the Shard Speaker, pretty tempting. Even more tempting, in my opinion, is the Slangor Slakehorn. That's going to be the leader of your Fiend Bloods. It's really amazing. It's pretty tough, hard to kill. It's got great damage coming out of it, and it's pretty fast too with 6-inch movement. Um, so it really gives you a little bit of everything, and most models that try to do that give you a little of everything, don't give you very much of anything. And that's not true at all of the Slakehorn. Just a really excellent piece sort of all around. The Blitzbarb High Tempter, it's good for being cheap, but pretty weak in general. The only thing to note is it gets a little bit more from Volley of Tearing Blades, which is the Blitzbarb buff ability. It gets a little bit more from that ability than regular Blitzbarbs do, so that can be kind of a nice option for certain types of missions. Um, the Myrmidesh Master, so that's this gentleman with the shield here and the shield that has teeth. Um, it's basically a Chaos Stormcast, very high toughness, um, sort of a little slow, uh, okay damage, but not as much as you would like. Um, yeah, I mean, even Stormcast probably wouldn't play it because they have better Stormcastier options, but that's essentially what you're getting with the Pain Master. Um, I don't really know where the intro point is with those. They're not awful, but I think that you have better options. Uh, one of which is the Ego Pomp. Um, Now it's got range 2. That's going to be the leader of the Twin Souls. So over here on the right side, bottom right. Range 2, which is nice, but also slow like the Pain Master, and doing even less damage, I think. So that can be sort of, it's not my favorite out of them. I guess it's usable very much. That range 2, it does enough damage to make the range 2 useful. Um, but in general, I think it's just outclassed, the Slakehorn being so good, and then the Shard Speaker having that utility. Also, just worth talking about the cavalry. The High Tempter Blitzbark Seeker, really weak damage, but 25-inch threat range is pretty interesting as far as that 15-inch shoot plus 10-inch movement. in the base game that can sort of solve you a lot of problems that you might not be able to solve otherwise. But doing the same damage as the 130 point high tempter, but for 220 points is pretty rough, from an efficiency standpoint. But if you love the model, it's playable. I'd say the same for the Slickblade Hunter Seeker. That's the sort of spearman leader, mounted spear leader. It's sort of in game, it's sort of a worse Hellreaver, which is the old ugly models that ride Seekers for mortals. But it's still absolutely usable. It's just kind of like I've said with some others, um, just kind of a mounted fast fighty unit. Um, yeah. For troops, you have a ton of options too, right? Because the entire box is usable. And also, one thing that's cool about the Twin Souls is that they have a bunch of different options in there. Um, the first thing is you get two Slangor Fiendbloods in the box, um, and just like their leader, they're really solid in Warcry. They're fast, they have above average damage, and yet they're somehow still not really made of glass either. Um, yeah, just really solid. Any of these units that are sort of around the 6-inch movement, um, that that have solid hit points, but or a solid amount of wounds, but not the highest toughness. I think those tend to be some of the best units in the game. You also get 9 80-point Bliss Barb Archers. The one sad thing with Bliss Barbs is they have the same stats as a Namarti Reaver, but 5 points more expensive. I think that 5 points is because of the ability they have access to, but if you're using it on an 80-point model, you're almost always honestly just wasting the dice. Um, so, that's too bad. And I think a lot of list building issues that can come up with Sybarites kind of all stems from the fact that, you just really wish you had Namarti Reavers instead of Archers. And I'll kind of talk about that when we get to the list. The Myrmidesh Painbringers, you have the option to build 8 of them if you want. They're kind of the classic overcosted toughness 5 unit. It's too bad, but you never know what we'll see in the next edition of the game. Um, the Symbaresh with paired blades. Now that's going to be the Symbaresh Twin Soul with just kind of two hand weapons, chopping around. It is your most damage efficient fighter in this entire sort of box. Uh, I haven't brought out the Math Hammer scores in a while, but it's got damage efficiency of 8.1, which is really high. So point for point, it's just chopping things up better than anything else you've got. Um, You've also got the Symbaresh Twin Soul with Cleaver, so that's just one big weapon. Um, that's just going to do a little bit worse or a little bit less damage than the paired blades against anything except for toughness 5. So, depending on what your play group plays, if they play a lot of Stormcast, stuff like that, the Cleaver will actually do more damage for you than the Twin Soul will, but against most opponents, that's not true. I think these are really interesting to kind of keep in mind um, as sort of things you can experiment with, just because they're so choppy that you've got to be able to find some use for them. Also, the Cymbaresh with Lash is really nice. So it has that 3-inch range, respectable damage. All of the Cymbaresh have really solid damage. Um, Great in catacombs because catacombs will often have these kind of very, very cramped battles where you can only fit so many people in there, and 3-inch range is amazing there, especially with kind of any kind of respectable damage output. Uh, Talking quick about the mounts, the Slick Blade Seeker. Oh man, Slaanesh is so hard for me like that. Um, Awful damage. Has the mount keyword. Uh, so many mounted units in the game have this issue where they do the same amount of damage as a foot unit would, but with costing way more points. Again, this is really just worth it in things like treasure missions where having something really fast to run onto something, grab the gold, and just be hard to kill later because you do get extra wounds for having that mount. Um, and extra speed too. So in treasure missions, these are good, but otherwise they're almost unplayable. Um, Same is true with the 165 point Bliss Barb Seekers. They do the same damage as a normal 80 point Bliss Barb Archer for twice the price. Again, outside of if you know you're going to be playing a treasure mission, I really wouldn't play them. Oh, okay. That's a lot of units. You get a ton of options. So this list is by no means sort of the be all end all of what you should do with the battle force. This is just how I would start building them. Having a Slakecorn, the Fiend Blood leader, two Fiend Bloods. I think you really want to max out, use all three. At first at least, because it's the most powerful unit in the box. Uh, then four Bliss Barbs, just to pump your numbers up. And then a Cymberesh Twin Soul with Lash. I think all of the Cymberesh are kind of interesting as models, even though they have some glaring weaknesses too. They're not as fast as the rest of the warband, for example. Um, but, you know, um, a warband like this, 8 models is enough so that you're not usually hurting for models. I usually prefer 9 or 10, but 8 should be fine. Um, this is one warband where, talking about the Bliss Barbs being exactly the same as a Namarti Reaver for 5 more points. If you had 20 more points in this warband, you could upgrade that Cymberesh Twin Soul into the choppier 138 point version, or you could, for example, have upgraded a Fiend Blood to Slake Slash. So let's talk about expanding with the Dread Pageant. Vasilak, Slake Slash, and Glisset um, all have rules for Warcry. The rules are all in German right now, so the Bladeborn box has still only been released in Germany, but they are GW official rules, and you can use all three of those in Warcry, and well, you can use all four of the Dread Pageant in Warcry, but specifically those three are really, really good, and absolutely worth using. So if you happen to have the Dread Pageant, absolutely you should experiment with it with your Battle Force crew. Um, Another one is Slaves to Impulse. It's a triple here. Okay, had a typo there, but Slaves to Impulse, as far as abilities to always be sort of looking out for with this warband, uh, it's the same as the Stalker ability, same as the um, Fleshhound ability from Korn. Uh, Again, one of the best abilities in the game. Um, I went through it with the OCR section, but just anytime you're playing a warband that has a version of this ability, being able to get a free movement activation, just always be on the lookout for ways you can use it effectively because it can absolutely swing games more than any other double that I've really played a bunch with, and I've played with most of them. So yeah, just an absolutely game-breaking ability. So let's get into slave Soulblight Grave Lords. I was still on the Slaves to Impulse kick. So they only come with one leader, and this is a box where everything but one thing in the box is usable in Warcry, but um, zombies and skeletons are just kind of minions, so they can't be leaders. So your only leader here is the Castellan, and it's a really solid mobile anvil. Um, you know, those units can struggle in the new Red Harvest, um, but for the most part, they're going to be very useful for you. And, like I've said before, in treasure missions is where mounts are really good, but um, the Castellan is just very especially difficult to kill and does enough damage that your opponent can't just kind of send random things at it and then hope to just take you out on weight of dice over time because you will eventually grind through a lot of the cheaper units that they send to you. So anytime your Castellan is sort of part of the target that your opponent needs to destroy, you're going to be kind of in a good spot. For troops, Blood Knights, you can do, four of them, but you can either do the 170 point blade version, you can do the lance version for 5 more points. The choice is going to be meta dependent, in my opinion. So the blade does 50% more damage against toughness 3, but only 12.5% more damage against toughness 5. So the lance has range too. The lance does kind of respectable damage, enough that they will have to treat it as a threat. Um, I think your chance of one-shot killing things with the blade for sort of cheap toughness 3 chaff means that if you have opponents who like to play a lot of sort of high numbers chaff heavy warbands, I really think you need to take the blades. Otherwise, if your opponents tend to play more elite stuff, I think you'll get more sauce out of the lance. Um, Now, this box comes with 20 skeleton warriors. Uh, the sword versus spear debate, really close. Pinning units, and by pinning, I mean where your real only thing you're doing is running up to something to try to get into combat with it. Um, skeletons do so little damage, but so normally I would say range 2 not very effective there because um, your opponent doesn't have to waste an activation to disengage, they can just ignore them. Um, However, move 3 is so restrictive that I think it's often going to be worth it to use the spear, um, just because otherwise your skeletons are so slow. So just getting any kind of extra reach at all is really helpful, I think. Um, 40 Deadwalker zombies come in this box. They're each 50 points each. 10 toughness 4 units or wounds for 40 points is mind-blowingly cheap. I don't know why I said 40 points when they're 50. So there we go, fix the typo. But this game, often doesn't reward having the tankiest models on the field. I am noticing that Red Harvest is a little bit kinder for that, but still damage is the most important thing. But when you're talking about literally the tankiest unit in the entire game, um, that can kind of go on its head. Potgrot might be tankier point for point. I'm not sure. Um, but Deadwalker zombies are an incredible unit for just sort of getting onto objective and not dying, so your opponent can't grind them off. You're often going to be outnumbering them, so taking that objective in round 1, you'll still have it in round 2, potentially still have it in round 3. Um, and that can be really valuable, right? So a lot of warbands just aren't going to be able to grind through all that meat, which, too bad for them. Great for you if you're spamming a ton of zombies. So a lot of people do like this kind of heavy attrition-based kind of play style, and I think the Gravelords are good for it. The Gravelords do have sort of fast, damagey units, um, but that's not what's in the box. Um, even the Blood Knights, they go 8 inches instead of 10, which is what so many comparable cavalry do, right? This is just a really tough, Blood Knights are really hard to kill. Just a really tough, attrition-y kind of, we're going to win on the numbers game, and you're just not going to get enough kills to make it matter type of warband. Um, so to that idea, I would probably go with, your Castellan because you have to. Um, 2 Blood Knights with blades, and then 9 various minions. So I'd go 4 skeletons with spears and 5 zombies, just to really flood the board. This is a list with 12 models. Most lists you come against, that's going to be pretty overwhelming. Um, yeah, just some really. This one, I would say this box comes with the most definitive play style, right, of that kind of sort of swarming, attritioning type of play style. Some other valuable stuff that you could add, these guys, because they're move 3 with the minions, these guys get so much out of having a Flesh Eater Quartz ally. Um, that huge movement ability just gets all your zombies and skeletons right to where they need to be. I didn't even put Graveguard here because they're just completely busted and incredible. So if you do like winning, you should get them. I think that's sort of what people are saying about the box in AOS too, is that all it's missing is some Graveguard. So chances are, if you're buying this box, your plan is to get some Graveguard anyway, and that'll be really solid for you. Also want to note Vargoyles are a really solid leader if you don't love your Castellan. Adding in a Vargoyle is going to be really good. Same with Vamp Lords. Those are really solid leaders. And another one where if you're buying this box for Age of Sigmar, there's a decent chance you're getting a Vamp Lord anyway. And that can really help you. Some people swear by the Necromancer, so I felt like I had to include it here. Um, I don't get it, but part of that's just because I have such an aversion to building around quads, just because you only have a 37% chance of even getting a quad in a given round. Um, it is, however, more doable in things like Catacombs or Red Harvest, where you have more rounds to shoot for that 37% in, so it's more likely to be relevant at some point in the game. Um, so some important abilities to note. Shambling Horde, it's kind of a middling movement ability, but it's really easy to combine with the Flesh Eater Quartz triple. It's just one of your minions can get a free movement. They only get 3 inches, but it's a free movement um, if they're near the leader. So that can be really useful. And because it's a double, real good chance to pop that and still have your FEC triple up if you have an ally. Call the Crimson Feast is a really solid AoE damage buff, something that you're going to want to sort of position to use as much as you can. And the skeletons having spears can be kind of nice. Um, having uh, an AoE buff, getting your people in there is easier if then they have an extra inch of range to fight out of it. As far as sort of making decisions about where you're going to put people, you just get more options when you have extra range. Um, Finally, Van Hel's Dance Macabre. I mentioned this before with the Necromancer. I hate building around quads. I think it's just too inconsistent for my taste, but some people love it. And man, if you get the Dance Macabre to happen like perfectly in the round right when everyone's been joined into combat. That's going to be amazing every time. So some people really swear by the ability. I think you only need to pull it off once to make you love it, is what it sounds like. So if that's the kind of playstyle that you like to have, is just kind of one huge bomb that might work or might not, absolutely grab a Necromancer and give it a try. So we do have one final box that's not one of these battle forces, but coming out at the same time. I think it's worth mentioning the Nurgle Vanguard box. It straddles 2 warbands, which is a little bit awkward. Rotbringers, it gives you all the options, which is great. So you get those 5 Blight Lords and those 2 Riders. You can combine them in a few different ways. Nurgle Rotbringers were kind of a meme. I think a lot of people consider them to be the weakest warband. Uh, for my money, I would say it's Fire Slayers, not Nurgle, but um, you know, you're fighting the good fight when you decide to take on Nurgle mortals. But you do get the Buzzy Flies here with this box, which I think really helps them a lot. The Puscoil Blight Lord is going to be able to move around for you. And then the one note, if you're having a Blight King heavy warband, is never leave home without the one with the bell, the Sonorous Toxin one. It boosts your movement by 1, which is sort of a real problem for Nurgle mortals, is only having that 3-inch movement. So have the bell, have it be in a different deployment group than your Buzzy Fly, and you can at least sort of avoid some auto loss scenarios that can be common to Nurgle if you do it that way, because then you're at least you have some movement in at least 2 different places. You also have Spoilpox and a bunch of Plague Bearers. Now, these are on the demon side, and in Warcry, demons and mortals are sort of 2 different factions with each one of these gods. Um, so Spoilpox plus the Plague Bearer leader, which is called a Plague Ridden, and 8 Plague Bearers, that only comes out to 770 points. So if you're buying Maggotkin of Nurgle box because you um, want to sort of play Nurgle in general, I think it's a great pickup, because you'll probably get a Sloppity Bile Piper or some Beast of Nurgles or some Nurglings anyway. And just adding Sloppity Bile Piper plus some Nurgles or Nurglings gives you a solid force. Um, but you know, just on its own, this box isn't a very good Warcry purchase, which is too bad, because a lot of start collecting boxes are, and it's also kind of unfortunate because it sounds like they're going to be replacing a lot of start collecting boxes with this Vanguard box. Start collecting Nurgle Demons is an amazing purchase for Warcry. It gives you kind of everything you would need for a pretty solid warband. Um, so yeah, it's kind of too bad that you won't have that option here, but if they get rid of that box, but they also might not, because it's also a legitimate 40K box too, so they might keep it around. Hopefully they do for Warcry purposes, but my sense is they won't. My sense is that these Vanguard boxes are going to be replacing the Start Collecting, which will make building on a budget, I think, a little bit harder in the future once they've gotten around to every faction for that. But I think that's a long way off. So the other thing that you get is pretty good warning, right? They've announced this Vanguard box. If you're interested in either of the two Start Collecting Nurgle boxes that will presumably be sunsetted with this box, you have plenty of time right now to try to pick them up. So that's my kind of summary of the four boxes for Warcry. I know most people are getting them for AOS, but like I said in a video this summer, I do think that Warcry is the best way to get started playing AOS because it kind of gives you your minimum viable product for your business junkies out there. So sort of gives you an actual game to play with your models before you have enough for Age of Sigmar actually painted up. Um, so yeah, some of these boxes are really solid. Some of them, for example, Slaanesh, you get everything you could ever want for Warcry other than the Dread Pageant, which I think is really amazing. I guess a Lord of Pain would help that box too, but um, and then some of them, like OC Arc, it's kind of low on options, but again, you have the three Stalkers, which is the best thing in OCR's roster anyway for Warcry, so you probably won't miss it much. Um, yeah, so just a really solid time of year always. Anytime, this is an expensive hobby. You do people say like, oh, it's an expensive hobby, so budget worrying isn't worthwhile. I don't believe that in any second. I want people to play the games they have fun with, regardless of what their income level is at. So I always love seeing anytime we get these sort of value boxes. Hopefully, it makes more ways for people to get better deals on eBay for their cheaper options to get playing in the game. So uh, that's all we got. I've got some more Warcry videos coming soon, and until then, may all your rolls be crits.